Hello everyone, it is Matt here from Scoop in Response, and today we are going to be looking at a card that is near and dear to my heart. It's one of the first commanders that I ever built, and I recently got a reprint, so really exciting. It's got the full art borderless sort of treatment, which is real sweet, as you can see on screen now. It's just an absolutely monstrous card. I really love the commander as a concept. It's super pushed, but I think the trick with this commander in particular is we want to build it in a way where our opponents don't groan when we start to sort of bring out the deck and basically say, I'm going to play this deck. So I know that Muldrotha can kind of be sort of a bit too good in a lot of instances, a bit too unfair, kind of that weird spot where it's too expensive to be a CEDH card or something like that, but it's also kind of too powerful and too much value is created for it to kind of just sort of let live in a battlecruiser environment. So it's in that really sort of high end of sort of non-CEDH. So I'm going to try and sort of tone it back a little bit, and we're going to be playing like a bit of an interesting style of deck with this. So it's not exactly just your strict good stuff pile. So a few caveats: we haven't included any of the black tutors because that's really just, we're just trying to build a bit of a pub stomp deck if we're going to be including all the black tutors and everything like that. We do have one black tutor, but it's a bit of a weird one, and it's definitely not mandatory by any means. It's really, I would say this is the card that you'd want to decide pretty quickly if you're going to cut, but we'll get into that when we start to look at our instants and sorceries. So the idea with this deck is we want to be looking at sort of alternative ways of playing cards, and I don't mean alternative casting costs or anything like that. I mean alternative win conditions and sort of creating value where it's a little bit of a weird kind of situation, so to speak. So that's kind of the overview of the deck. We'll jump straight into it, just having a look, starting with the creatures first up. So you'll see your first top row there. For the most part, we've got our Arbor Elf, Birds of Paradise, Elves of Deep Shadow, Elvish Mystic. These are our very typical dorks. We've got Llanowar Elves as well, really just about ramping and everything like that. In the 1-drops remaining, we've got the 2 crabs, which are basically the alternative, I guess, win con, an alternative way of playing the deck, I guess you would say. So we're not a mill deck, but we're also sort of a mill deck. So basically, the inclusion of the crab, and the crabs rather, is really just because we have a bit of a landfall theme with a Shire, as well as I'm sure you can see, and the Lotus Cobra. We've got a little bit of a landfall theme, but it's not a hard mill deck. It's not a hard landfall deck. We're not trying to just smash things out. Realistically, the Hedron Crab in particular, you can use to mill yourself, which is what you want to be doing to sort of get threats into your bin. So it's really just used to sort of fuel your engine, and then eventually you can sort of go off with a Ruin Crab and Hedron Crab mill strategy if you want. But I would say it's absolutely not necessary. There's other ways that we can get wins in this deck, and we'll sort of look at that. We've got Bloom Tender, a really good dork in a 3-color deck, so taps for 3 if you've got all 3 colors out. We've got Douthie Voidwalker, just an absolutely sweet card overall. I really like the ability to recur with the Douthie Voidwalker in this deck, so everything that is put into the graveyard gets exiled with a void counter, but the cool thing is once you sacrifice this, you actually get to cast it again thanks to Muldrotha, and those old void counter cards are still available to you, so really sweet there. The Ethereum Sculptor, it reads as, artifact spells you cast cost 1 less, so that's maybe a bit of an indication as to what we're doing. We've got a few of the better dredges, so we've got Golgari Thug, we've got Stinkweed Imp, And both of those cards are just absolutely awesome for just putting things into the bin and starting to get a bit of options with your second hand, which is the graveyard. Oh, probably worth me mentioning, I didn't actually read the card for you guys, but I'm sure you guys can, but we'll just go over it again. So during each of your turns, you may play a land and cast a permanent spell of each permanent type from your graveyard. So basically your graveyard becomes an extension of your hand. So looking at the remaining creatures, we've got Lotus Cobra. It's just a bit of a landfall, a bit of ramp for you. We've got Malevolent Hermit, which is a counter spell on a stick that also is not something that you're sad about milling over, dredging over in the early parts of the game, because you can cast it for Disturb. So really sweet with that. We've got Outland Liberator, which is a removal spell on a stick, and I would say that this one is particularly good in this deck versus something like Reclamation Sage or the Manglehorn, purely because it sacrifices itself, so you don't have to find a way to get it into the bin before you can cast it again. Phantasmal Image, copying stuff, seems pretty standard for that. Prosperous Innkeeper. Now this is a way that there is one of our infinite outlets with this card. We can do some funny stuff with this, which we'll go into in a bit of detail. You may have already worked out how we can do that. We've got Dryad of the Elysian Grove, just a bit of fixing, and of course the additional land drops per turn are really sweet. Eternal Witness, this is to get the few instants and sorceries, so we've got 9 non-permanent cards in this deck, and it's just to get those back, but as well as getting other cards that you may want to protect from the graveyard, back into your hand or something like that. So really useful spell. Foundry Inspector, another way to reduce the cost of your artifacts, so really sweet. Opposition Agent, it's a bit of a hate piece. We do have some hate pieces in this deck, obviously Douthie Voidwalker and Opposition Agent for the most part in our creatures, but we'll look at a few artifacts and enchantments that do that as well. Spellseeker. Spellseeker basically has one job, and that one job is to go and get you your copy of Life from the Loam, because I just personally believe that Life from the Loam is one of the strongest cards. I absolutely love it. I think it's absolutely insane, but it can also go and get a Reanimate, which we'll look at a bit later as well. There's a few really sweet targets for that. We mentioned the Stinkweed Imp, along with the Golgari Thug, so just for dredging. We're never casting these, it's just literally to dredge. Trinket Mage. Now this is going to sort of fit into the pile, which you may sort of have worked out part of it. It's just the dogs going in the background. So the Trinket Mage is going to be getting our cheaper artifacts. If we can find a way of getting the Trinket Mage back into the bin or recurring that ETB somehow, who knows how we could do that. We can start to dig out all of our cheap artifacts from our deck and do lots of cool and wonderful things. Second last, we've got Displacer Kitten. So this is actually the card that made me think about this deck in particular. So Displacer Kitten's a new one. It reads, whenever you cast a non-creature spell, exile up to one target non-land permanent you control, and then return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control. Now when we do this with Muldrotha, what that means is, if we cast a non-land permanent from the graveyard, and then we trigger Displacer Kitten, it will then flicker the Muldrotha, and we can go and cast another non-land permanent from the graveyard, which will then allow us to flicker Muldrotha again. So basically every turn, if we have enough mana, we can get every single non-land card out of our graveyard and onto the battlefield. So very exciting. And as you know, a lot of artifacts and enchantments, they can actually sacrifice themselves. So we can do some really cool and wonderful things with that. Lastly, we've got a Shire Soul of the Wild. Now this is really just so that we don't have to be obnoxious with our win condition. If we actually want to win the game, we can do some cool things with the Shire and actually win. So a Shire basically reads, it has power and toughness equal to the number of lands you control, but that's not what we care about. It's non-token creatures you control are forest lands in addition to their other types. So if we're doing things like flickering creatures with the Displacer Kitten, every time that creature enters the battlefield, it's also a land, which triggers our crabs, which means we can mill things. And if we're milling things and we have Douthie Voidwalker on the field, it actually means we're exiling them as well. So It's a replacement effect, which is super relevant too. So that means that you're not going to get like, you know, there's a lot of things that basically are going to get negated by, you know, they're not going to make it into the bin. So really good with that. Probably best to check out how all of the Shuffle Titans work with that as well. We won't go into that interaction too much, but that's basically our, I guess, the core of our deck here. So we want to be doing something that's powerful, but we also don't want to be, I guess, so stupidly strong that our opponents just groan and get upset because we're, you know, I don't know, making an insane amount of like Zendikar, what is it, the big thing that makes the plants, that thing. Yeah, I'm terrible with the names. You know what I'm talking about. It's the landfall guy. Here it is on the screen, bang. That thing. So yeah, that's basically the, you know, there's lots of ways that we could be absolutely brutal. You know, if you want to turn this into a stupidly powerful deck, add, you know, Imperial Seal, add Demonic Tutor, add Vampiric Tutor, add Mystical Tutor, and you know, cut something that you don't like in the deck, and then add a Craterhoof Behemoth or a Temur Sabertooth, and you'll be able to just work out how to go infinite super easily, and you'll be able to have all of those super redundant tutor targets and win really quickly. That's not what we're about. That's not what we're looking to do. We're just looking to have a bit of fun with an alternative way to win the game with a commander that probably, you know, gets a bit of flack for being a bit too generically good. So next up, we've got our instance sorceries, and we're going to touch on the planeswalkers too. We'll go for the planeswalkers first. Ashiok, you can target yourself and you can exile your opponent's graveyards. So you want to be targeting yourself most of the time with that one. Grist is pretty sweet because you can use it as a creature or a planeswalker from the bin. So, you know, most of the time it's going to be a planeswalker that you cast it from the bin. He's also removal on a stick, so really awesome with that. And of course, Broko, just a really good card in general. This is also probably one of those cards that if you wanted to play something a bit more niche, I would definitely say, yeah, just cut this card, put something that's not as generically good in its place. But I, for one, sort of want to, you know, be able to find that balance, and, you know, you can always just choose not to prioritize casting it if you get too many groans. The instants and sorceries we've got, so we've got Reanimate, just a really good target for our Spellseeker, but, you know, you don't have to cast it on your own graveyard. You can cast it on other people's graveyards, which is really sweet. And you can do some cool things with, once again, with the Displacer Kitten. If you cast the Reanimate and then you play the Displacer Kitten and you flicker the Eternal Witness with the Displacer Kitten trigger, that can go and get back your Reanimate, and then you can go and reanimate other things again and again and again once you've got all of that mana. So really sweet, really fun. Yeah, really, really awesome stuff with that. Buried Alive is that tutor that I was referring to, and probably should mention there is also one other tutor I kind of forgot about in the introduction, which is Entomb. These are just insanely strong cards. They're just insanely good. They basically, what do you want to do? You put it into the bin. It's really cheap. You know, Buried Alive, you can make a pile with Displacer Kitten, Trinket Mage, and a Shire, or Displacer Kitten, Trinket Mage, and Eternal Witness, and you can basically get those three cards into the bin, and you can start winning the game from there if you need to kind of speed things up. So obviously these are our like win buttons. We just want to decide whether or not we want those in the deck, and you don't have to go and get like the absolute nut combo for them and try and, you know, spike it up on the table. I would say it would be fun to do things like going to get Golgari Thug and Stinkweed Imp with your Buried Alive. You know, those are very legitimate targets. It's basically just a way of, you know, milling yourself quite a bit and, you know, having a bit of fun in the process. Toxic Deluge and Damnation and Culling Ritual, these are our board wipes. Probably pretty obvious why we're including them there. Life from the Loam, as I mentioned, I just think it's one of the best cards in Magic. It's absolutely my favorite card. You get to do things with your lands, you get to do things with your lands, you get to do things with your lands. And we're playing a few channel lands and a few things like that, which you'll get to see that actually make sense to recur them to your hand rather than to the battlefield. So obviously fetch lands are great with it too if you want to, you know, have more than that, or if you've got additional land drops, you know, thanks to Dryad, and you can't always you know, play a land just from the bin with Muldrotha. We've got Dark Blast. So this is another dredge card. It's very, very small removal. on a stick. Dredge 3, so we want to be casting it, but we also want to be dredging with it, so really sweet there. And rounding that out is Assassin's Trophy. You could definitely add Abrupt Decay. There's lots of other removal spells that you could stick in the deck that would be sweet. This is sort of how I've chosen to sort of manage this. The Assassin's Trophy is mostly because of it's just, you know, a target permanent, which can target anything. We've got enchantment-based removal, which is what makes up the bulk of the removal for the deck. Moving into the next piece, so we have artifacts. So there's a few obvious pieces. Jeweled Lotus, Mana Crypt. These are great cards just for ramping up to our 6. If you don't have them, or you don't want to include them, or you don't want to proxy them, or whatever it is, you know, they're not necessary for it by any stretch. Same with the Mox Diamond. I appreciate that it is a very expensive card. If you're playing it on Moto, it's almost nothing, but in paper it's very expensive if you're not proxying it, or you're playing it at LGS where they don't allow proxies. Totally understand that you wouldn't want to play that. Yeah, more than fine. I guess the Displacer Kitten and Lotus Petal infinite combo is really the primary way of generating infinite mana. So we cast our Lotus Petal and flicker Muldrotha. We sacrifice our Lotus Petal and cast a Lotus Petal and flicker Muldrotha. We can do that as many times as we want to make infinite mana and infinite Storm. Not that we have any Storm pieces in this deck. You definitely chuck in a Brain Freeze and it'd be real fun once you've got infinite Storm. Yeah, it's really up to you how you want to do that. Definitely fine in that regards. The Spell Bomb is removal on a stick. You know, you can bounce target creatures. It's also a way to draw cards. Chromatic Sphere, Chromatic Star. These are cards that obviously cantrip. We want our cantrips to be permanent based so that we can do them over and over again with Muldrotha. And these cards just represent really, really insane value. Eggs, whatever you want to call them. They're just great. And also being non-land permanents, they also work with Displacer Kitten. Executioner's Capsule is destroy target non-black creature, so you can use it to just, you pay 2 and tap to sacrifice it, and it just destroys the non-black creature every turn if you want, or as many times as you can cast it. Expedition Map is just a great card for searching for specific lands, so you might want to go and find something like a Urza's Saga. We're running Gaia's Cradle in the list as well, because we've got quite a few creatures. Once again, you know, you don't have to go and play this deck. When I put it together, it costs about $5,500 US. Obviously, I'm not saying that you should be playing a $5,500 deck if you don't own dual lands and you don't own Mox Diamond. These are not by any means you know, critical cards for this deck. It's just I would instantly swap them without an issue for all of the you know, the multiplayer lands. Totally fine, reasonable substitutes. It's just a case of I like playing fetches, and that's why I'm in there. There's probably a lot of you that probably own them as well, so yeah, I've included them. Mana Vault, another one that's, you know, pretty decent for just ramping. Sol Ring, Arcane Signet for ramp and fixing too. And now we're moving into a few other pieces. We've got Defense Grid. So during each player's turn, each other player's spells cost 3 or more to play. So you'll notice that we don't have counter spells other than our Malevolent Hermit. Is that what it's called? Yeah, Malevolent Hermit. I think that one of the reasons that Muldrotha kind of gets a bit of flack is because of having access to blue. You get to play all of the great removal, all of the best free counter spells, and then you get this value engine stapled onto it on top of it. So I've made a conscious decision to not put any counter spells in that aren't off of the Malevolent Druid, and instead we're going to kind of try and do things that telegraph you know, and allow our opponents to spend resources to not basically not necessarily to you know, we're just going to lose the game, but basically we're saying you've got to fight against my value engine rather than the colors that I have access to. And Defense Grid, I think, is a good example of that. Ensnaring Bridge, another great example of that kind of card. You know, you could be playing a whole bunch of different things to stop yourself from getting attacked, just to, you know, to be doing unfair things, but we want to kind of err on that fairer side so that we've got this this hopefully super fun deck that we can loan out to our friends if they want to play it. You know, it doesn't really require a whole bunch of big brain thinking. Yeah, basically just being able to, you know, play a fun deck. Gilded Lotus, the last piece of ramp for that. And then finally we have Monster Manual. So this card is really sweet in this deck. I think it's awesome. We've got the sorcery side says mill 5 cards and then return a creature card milled this way to your hand. So really cool with that, you know, just filling up the bin with all of those weird and wonderful things that we can be putting in there. But then we've got paying 2 and a tap. You may put a creature card from your hand onto the battlefield. So it's kind of like a green sneak attack, sort of. We don't get to do it more than once. So I think it's pretty fair, 6 mana for that rate. And you know, if we look back to our creatures, it's not like we've got a whole bunch of things that we can cheat in for insane value. If you want to chuck in a Crater Hoof, if you want to chuck in well, not a Progenitus, but if you want to chuck in like a big beater or just big expensive, you know, Woodland Bellower is probably one. You can definitely do that, but that's not what we're looking to do with this deck. I would say, you know, take the bones of this and move it into the into the area that you want to. Yeah, I'm just trying to avoid, yeah, basically making that too generic in that respect. But yeah, the Monster Manual is really fun. It's a good way to sort of have, you know, counterspell proof with your cards, because you know you're not actually casting it, you're sort of vialing it in. So yeah, really sweet with that. Moving on to the next category, we've got enchantments. So we've got Abundant Growth, you know, shouldn't really be a surprise. Utopia Sprawl, it's just fixing and ramp. Carpet of Flowers, another way to ramp. Now, you know, if you're not playing in a heavy blue meta, this card's going to feel a bit bad, and you're just not going to get any, you know, any value from it. But I just think it's such a great card, and you know, if it just sits in your, if it sits in your bin and doesn't do anything for the game, that's totally fine. Not an issue at all. Exploration is a really good card. You know, play an additional land on each of your turns. It costs 1, so if they get rid of it, you're just doing it again the next turn. Mystic Remora is also another one that you can just, you know, let it die each turn and then you play it, or you let it die every second turn and then you don't have to pay the upkeep on the second time, because you know you're just going to cast it again and it resets the upkeep. Seal of Removal, it is removal on a stick, super cheap, one blue, and it's just return target creature to its owner's hand, and it also happens to be a non-land permanent, so it flickers with this Displacer Kitten, so really sweet with that. Animate Dead, just a silly card. You know, you can do all kinds of weird and wonderful stuff. The deck doesn't have a sack outlet, so we can't just, you know, be absolutely ridiculous with this card, but you can definitely have some fun with this card, animating things with it. Bitter Blossom, just value basically. This is what we want to be using to have blockers where we don't have Ensnaring Bridge, or this last card that you might see, Propaganda. You know, we want to have some form of protection. I think Bitter Blossoms are really cheap, affordable, and given that it's been reprinted, it's now monetarily cheap by comparison too. Seal of Primordium, it's destroy target artifact or enchantment. So between Seal of Removal and Seal of Primordium, we've got some really good removal on a stick, as well as Executioner's Capsule. Yeah, Survival of the Fittest is another one that's, I guess, kind of too good to not include, because you choose to discard a creature card, and because it's a creature card and it goes into your graveyard, it just means that you can cast it with Muldrotha again. You know, it's a $250, $300 card. If you don't own it, proxy it, swap it for something else. You can put a Fauna Shaman in if you want. That's, you know, pretty much a similar thing. Sylvan Library is just too good. Another generically good card. I would completely understand if you felt that it was too generically good. I just like it for the card draw, particularly given that we don't really have a lot of ways to start engines before Muldrotha. I think this is a good way to sort of start our engines with Muldrotha, but you know, before we get to 6 mana. Necromancy is another Animate Dead. It's kind of cool for 3 mana. Yeah, really sweet. And yeah, Propaganda, another Ensnaring Bridge type effect, where players have to pay 2 for each creature that's attacking you. So not too crazy good. It's not going to stop, you know, them wanting to go lethal with their commander, but it's definitely going to stop all that chip damage. Lastly, rounding out the deck, we have the lands. So it's pretty straightforward for the most part. We've got lots of fetchable targets and the best lands that tap for everything. So we've got City of Brass, Command Tower, you know, all that kind of stuff, Mana Confluence. The only other things that are really of note is the Otawara and the Boseiju, which are great for recurring with Life from the Loam, and Urza Saga, which you can recur from Life from the Loam as well. We're playing Field of the Dead because why not? It's a great card. Making zombies is really sweet. And yeah, that's pretty well the deck. So, you know, as I mentioned, this is just about doing something different. There's so many different ways that you could build this deck, so many different ways you can build the commander, and I really think it's like worth mentioning that, you know, you don't have to just go and play this, you know, Crater Hoof big stompy thing and bounce it over and over or anything like that. This is really just to give you a good start with where you want to be with this deck. You know, don't go and, you know, spend 5 grand on dual lands if you don't own them, and, you know, Guy's Cradle. No one's saying do that. Just make sure that you're playing, you know, an appropriate power level of the table. But the main thing is to sort of, I believe for most players pods, you should be able to sort of start with this. You probably only need to tune 5 to 6, maybe 10 cards within the deck to basically have it be viable but not overpowered in the pod. And that's really, I think, the biggest problem that Muldrotha's got is we've all got that one guy that we know, or one person that we know that you know, just has that Muldrotha deck that it's definitely not CEDH, but it just stomps all of the other decks because you know, you can't deal with it efficiently. So yeah. Thanks very much for checking out the deck. Really hope you enjoy it. If you have a look on the channel, we've got quite a few different things happening at the moment. There's a bit of modern stuff coming out. We've got a lot of 7-point videos if you're in Australia and you're interested in playing some 7-point Highlander. We've got a lot of that stuff coming out as well. And yeah, of course, you know, modern streams happening from time to time, as well as some DJ sets by Stream 2 over on Twitch. So if you enjoyed what you see here, or you're interested in you know, checking out other things, make sure you give a bit of a sub to us, and you know, then you can stay up to date with everything that we are doing. Thanks so much for checking out the vid, and I'll see you next time. Bye for now.